Well, good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're really excited tonight to have Laura Dowdy with us. We have had quite a few requests for information on dysgraphia. So tonight, we were able to find someone who could help us and to educate us on in this area. And she was at the Dyslexia Institute this summer that Region 10 hosted and just did a fabulous job. So we kind of twisted her arm and convinced her to join us through Zoom tonight. So just a little bit about Laura Dowdy Northcutt. She is an occupational therapist. She began her career working with neurological patients who had spinal injuries or traumatic brain injuries or strokes. And then she moved into pediatrics. She has two children who have some learning differences. And so she is a parent as well as a professional in this area. She has done the Dysgraphia intervention program for the Humble ISD down by Houston. And so, Laura, we're going to just pass it on to you.
Yes.
We thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much. Whoops, let me see if this will go. There we go. So how did I get here? Puff told y'all a little bit about myself, and I did come from adult neuro. And when my first son was born, I moved into outpatient pediatrics, and that was great. And it kind of transitioned into the school setting. I practiced in the school setting since 2011 as an occupational therapist. And then in 2017-18, I was placed in the Director of Responsive Services position, which is over dyslexia and 504. And I jokingly tell people the one thing that has stayed the same in dyslexia since 17-18 has been there's something that changes drastically every year. So sometimes I wonder why I stay. Sometimes I miss clocking in and out of the hospital, but I do have a reason for why I stay in education and work towards better understanding of students with disabilities. And that's because I have two children of my own. This is Jackson, my now 7th grader. You can tell he has great style, a lot of right brain stuff going on there. And then this is Sammy. He is my 8th grader. And I'm in a family, all of us have ADHD, which I can tell you is a real challenge come medication time when you have to get it by a certain date for 3 different people. So that's a challenge. But they both have dysgraphia, and I'll talk about them later on as we go on. But this is why I'm still in education, even though dyslexia keeps changing every year. It's never boring, that's for sure. And I continue to learn each year that I'm in this practice. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about written language and give you an overview of the development of reading and writing skills. We're going to talk about dyslexia. I'm going to go really surface on dyslexia because I feel like a lot of people have heard more about dyslexia than they have dysgraphia. I'm going to go into dysgraphia after we talk about what the handbook says about the definition, evaluation, and intervention. I'm going to do a couple of simulations so you understand the underlying causes as a writer, and it'll help you understand the characteristics that we look for as well. And then finally, I'm going to do accommodations, which are so essential in our students being able to access grade level curriculum. Without it, they can't, and it's super essential. And I want to talk about that as a parent when I get there. So we'll get started. So written language, development of reading and writing skills. On the pathway to reading and writing, we have oral language. We have listening is receptive oral language. I can understand what is being said to me. And then I can speak, I can express myself and communicate to others. So that's the basis of written language disorders. And we'll talk about why in just a little bit. For written language, we move to reading, which is decoding or word reading. It's receptive. And then writing, encoding or expressive. And that's the highest form When you're looking at intervention, spelling and seeing evidence of learning in students' written expression is the highest form that they can demonstrate skill acquisition. So going back to language, on oral language, receptively we listen, expressively we speak. So getting into written language is reading or decoding, and writing, which is encoding. If we're talking about brain real estate that's devoted to oral language, that is biologically hardwired. It's an automatic process. You can see evidence of that when you're holding a newborn, or and just cooing and talking and they're just looking at you, or when you're talking with your toddler and they're starting to use words. The words might not come out well, but they're starting to see that words have meaning and understand language. So as that oral language develops, it's very automatic. It's kind of hardwired or pre-wired biologically to happen. Written language is very different. It's not hardwired. The brain actually has to take space that was hardwired for other things and make new circuits and connections to develop the literacy brain. So this resource is from Spell Links Learning by Design. It's not my own, but I did like their picture, so I wanted to share with you. This is the language network for oral language. Like I said, it's automatic. The process happens. You can see that as evidenced, with children going from infants on up. And then this is what has to be rewired and really laying new connections, new wiring, and repeating those until they're myelinated. And that's what develops into efficient reading. So it really is a lot of work to get to what we call being an efficient reader. So the National Reading Panel released a report in 2000. Oral language is the basis of written language, but they talked about the 5 pillars of early literacy. I really like this graphic. It's from Arizona Education, but they talk about the 5 different pillars. You have phonemic awareness, which is the ability to identify the sounds in speech. So I can do phonemic awareness activities with my eyes closed. I don't need my vision because we haven't added graphemes or letters yet. When I get to the second part, known as phonics or decoding or word analysis, that's when you add the letters to the sounds and you start to understand the connection there. Once I'm able to decode words and I'm starting to build fluency, with reading fluency, I'm able to read with a grade level or age appropriate rate with good prosody. And then when I am able to access reading, my vocabulary grows. It grows out of oral language, so I'm already coming in with vocabulary, but making that connection to the written word and comprehension. So those are our 5 pillars of early literacy. What's impacted in dyslexia is the first 2, which impact the third. Those are the components that we see needing support in our students with dyslexia. The reading development is simple view is word reading or decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. So that's really the simple view of reading. If you're looking at how it more realistically develops is a winding. We don't develop one skill in isolation fully before we develop the next. You're developing multiple skills at the same time, possibly at different rates. But looking at Scarborough's reading rope, you're looking at word recognition, the ability to read with the PA decoding and sight words or recognition of familiar words. That is what needs to become increasingly automatic in order to become a skilled reader. So looking at the simple view of writing, we have text generation or content ideas and voice. We have transcription skills, which is handwriting, spelling, spacing, punctuation, and capitalization. And then our executive functions allow us to do the writing process. We're able to use focused attention to plan, review, revise, and self-regulate the writing process. All of this is connected with verbal working memory. And writing is one of the hardest tasks students will do in their reading and writing, but writing especially. There's multiple levels of brain activity going on. They're using all of their decoding knowledge and using it to generate and express themselves via written text. This is something that I developed. When I came into dyslexia, actually about 2 years before, we had a deputy superintendent at the time that had a son with dysgraphia, and he charged a group of us with doing some research on dysgraphia, developing an evaluation protocol and an intervention program to help students with dysgraphia because he had a son with it. And so I took, this is, the source is me. It's from my occupational therapy background. OTs are always looking at child development and seeing what skills are developed well, what skills are maybe lacking that we need to enhance, and how can we put it all together to make functional learning possible. So looking at foundational skills, and that's, I mean, it develops from birth and beyond, but I'm really looking at early learners. You're looking at fine motor dexterity. Do they have that? Do they have visual motor skills? Do they have good tone, strength, posture? All of those things are going to feed into what's expected to them when they get to K and 1. Perception, things like directionality, spatial relations, visual perception, using both eyes at the same time. Those are all related to visual perception and perception. Cognitive, we've got executive function, working memory, attention, being able to focus on what's important and ignore what's not important. All of those are cognitive skills that need to be developed in writing. Social emotional is also important, as well as language, which I've talked about, oral language. And then moving here, when the end of year expectation in kindergarten is that students write legibly their lowercase letters, uppercase and lowercase letters with good legibility. And that's the end of year kinder. And when they get to first grade, they're focused more on words, etc., but they're still supposed to have the legible letter formation. So looking at this area right here, this is really where we're talking about dysgraphia. There's a challenge here where these skills developed and the transcription skills, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. But it's these skills that then allow students to have organization, structure, start to use bigger vocabulary. They know larger words because they really need that automaticity in order to move on in the developmental cycle. And then when you get to complex writing, they're fully automatic. They're able to use appropriate grammar, clarity. All of this stuff is happening simultaneously because they're not struggling with the handwriting fluency or automaticity. You'll see a lot of different, I guess, pre-writing stages of development. These are not from any one source. It's kind of a combination of sources. But at age 2 or 3, you'll see kids, they'll start scribbling or drawing and using a writing utensil. Then they start to approximate and do things that look like letters or approximate letters, but they're pretty big and large. And the next phase is when they start learning the actual graphemes or letters and using spaces. That phoneme grapheme correspondence is coming into play here, as well as their awareness of placement. Where do I start the letter? Where do I place the letter on the line, etc. Then they're really developing, working on that handwriting fluency. It's becoming more and more automatic with each grade level, and this is typical development. That automaticity should really be there so a student can have fluency for composition. That's when they're looking at paragraphs of text, when you're talking about TEKS expectations. And in middle school and high school, they really get to that higher level of a writer where they're using their own voice, using their own style of writing, ability to be creative, because all of those transcription skills have become automatic by this point. So that's how normal, typical reading and writing development goes. So let's talk about dyslexia really quick. It's a specific learning disability that's neurobiological in origin, characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. That's usually what the teacher sees first in the classroom. The cause is a deficit in the phonological component of language, but it's unexpected in relation to their other abilities and effective classroom instruction. What the teacher sees next are the possible secondary consequences if we're not able to intervene early and remediate. The secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension. We talked about the 5 pillars that PA and phonics lead into reading fluency. And if I'm not able to read text fluently, I will quickly get behind and not be able to read for comprehension because my mental energy is being consumed by my difficulty in decoding. And because of that reduced reading experience, it can really impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. And I'm just going to briefly talk about the handbook because I know a lot of you are here for the dysgraphia component this evening. But dyslexia evaluation, it is a SPED pathway only as of August 3rd in House Bill 3928. They released an FAQ on that, and they were very clear about dyslexia and dysgraphia evaluation and services, that it's only available through the SPED pathway, which is a change for Texas. But the academic skills impacted in dyslexia, a quick way to remember is letter knowledge, reading words in isolation. Non-words in isolation would be unfamiliar words. We usually use nonsense words to measure that. We don't use it in instruction, but we use it to measure their knowledge of decoding text. And then reading fluency, RAP, which is rate, accuracy, and prosody, and spelling. Those are the academic skills that we look at dyslexia. It's really important when you're doing evaluation for dyslexia to look at the benchmarks at beginning, middle, and end of year, whether you're using something like national fluency norms or your benchmark screeners in education, things like Ames Web and MAP, things like that. You really want to look at those different pieces because in the younger student, they're going to fall back. It won't be as big as a fallback, but you'll see them start trailing off in the percentages, and that's something you want to be aware of. As far as dyslexia intervention, it's straight from the handbook. We're looking at components. These are the required components when we're looking at dyslexia intervention. It's covered in chapter 4 of the handbook. The methodology is simultaneous multisensory, a visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. It must be systematic and cumulative. You can't skip portions or you're going to have gaps. And that's why we're there to support the gaps in learning already. Explicit instruction, diagnostic teaching to automaticity. There's a lot of repetition built in the dyslexia programs in order to make sure that we're automatic before moving on too far. And both synthetic and analytic instruction are also required. Oops, sorry, went the wrong way. So now for dysgraphia, which I'm going to slow down a little bit because I know a lot of you are curious about dysgraphia. What the teacher sees first, or actually the definition. There we go. Sorry, I messed up my animation there. But it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. What the teacher sees first is illegible or inefficient handwriting due to difficulty with the letter formation. The cause can be a deficit in either graphomotor function, which are hand movements used for writing. We'll talk a little bit more about graphomotor. There's 3 components to it, according to the handbook. It can also be storing and retrieving orthographic codes for letter forms. We'll talk about that a little bit. What teachers see later, the secondary consequences of not being able to have legible or an efficient rate of handwriting is the student will likely struggle with written expression and may also struggle with spelling. So when we're looking at a dysgraphia evaluation, The primary features are handwriting legibility or accuracy of the letter forms and handwriting rate or fluency. The important thing that I will say about handwriting legibility, and speaking as an OT, it took me a while to realize teachers can read things that I could never read because they were there. They knew what the assignment was. They knew the context. They know the student. So they're using all of that to decipher some writing that I wouldn't be able to read. So when I'm talking about handwriting legibility, it's important that when you're evaluating that you're looking at some type of rubric or you have a set rubric or guidelines that you're using. What we use in Humble is the PAL by Virginia Berninger, and she has a handwriting legibility and automaticity formal assessment. And I just want to say that teachers are great about deciphering, and they might not think a student is so bad compared to boys, or I hear all this a lot. Well, it's like a few kids in the classroom, or that's typical writing. But really, you have to look at the TEKS. The TEKS expectation is that students have legible uppercase and lowercase print by the end of kindergarten. And if not, they quickly fall behind. So it's important to look at the age expectation and the TEKS expectation. When you're looking at underlying causes of evaluation, you're looking for that orthographic processing piece, and as well as graphomotor function. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the academic skills impacted when I'm not able to either write legibly or with an effective rate. Our dictation, that could be in lower elementary, like spelling, or in upper grades, note-taking. Copying either from the board or from something on their desk. Written composition and spelling also come into play. One thing important to look at when you're looking at dysgraphia, you want to understand the expectation in the classroom. What are students expected to do in the classroom? And if they are in secondary, in the multiple classes they have, what are the written task demands? And are they able to keep up with peers? Are they able to accomplish that task via handwriting? Because that's what we're looking at. A deeper dive into the causes. This is from the Dyslexia Handbook, page 61. Talks about dysgraphia can be due to impaired feedback the brain is receiving from the fingers, weaknesses using visual processing to coordinate hand movement and organize the use of space, problems with motor planning and sequencing, and or difficulty with storage and retrieval of letter forms. So if we take the first three, and I just put this as Dowdy OT on graphomotor. This is not coming directly from the handbook. The handbook is what is listed above. But with my OT background, this is my 2 cents on the graphomotor components. When you're talking about feedback the brain is receiving from the fingers, that can be feedback from the joints. It can be skin or even visual feedback. You can see how your hand is moving or what you're writing on the page. When you're talking about weaknesses in visual processing or organizing the use of space, you're really looking at visual perception and visual motor integration skills. When I'm looking at problems with motor planning and sequencing, it's important to understand the components, the motor components that feed into handwriting successfully. Being able to use both sides of the body in combination. They're using the helper hand to stabilize the paper while they're writing with their dominant hand. They're crossing midline. When we write on our paper, we take our dominant hand and go across our body. That's why we tilt the paper a certain way. That's crossing midline. You will see students that really struggle with that. They'll switch hands in the middle of the paper and they'll hold their paper really close to their belly straight up with no tilt. That's kind of a strategy they use when they struggle with that crossing midline. The grip and hand manipulation skills and the strength are important, as well as posture. When you're sitting up straight and you have a stable base because your arms are just hung on your body, with your scapula and your muscles. So that's what is holding your arms in place. And it's important when looking at movement, it's important to look at proximal stability. How stable is my base? Because I have to be stable proximally or at my shoulders and my arms and my elbow in order to just isolate my finger movement. That's called distal mobility. So you have to have proximal stability before you can have distal mobility. Otherwise, it just breaks down because it has nothing to stabilize. And that's seen when you see kids that are writing with their whole arm instead of just using their fingers to write. They're usually struggling in that area. Wrist stability and extension is important. What that means is I'm not writing with my wrist hooked. If you take your fingers and act like you're threading a needle, that is distal motor control. I've got my stable base. These are my gripping hands. If you think about holding a hammer, think about where your power comes from. It comes from your your ring and your small finger, which are your gripping side of your hand. When we're doing fine motor tasks, we're using our middle and index as well as our thumb, and these are stabilized. So this is the grip side, and this is the prehension side of the hand. A lot of times we see students with kind of a splayed grasp, and that would look like this. If I was the queen of kindergarten, I would tell you that I would ban all adult-sized pencils in kindergarten. I'd give everyone a half size of a golf pencil without an eraser, because then they can only get these 3 fingers on there. They don't have to stabilize it because it's so light in their hand. Usually when you see younger children holding an adult pencil like this, their hand strength isn't fully developed until the age of about 7 or 8. And so they struggle to hold that adult pencil. Even the eraser kind of has a pull. When you're using a smaller pencil with an eraser, it kind of throws the hand mechanics off. So I think that would solve many of our grip problems that we see today. I don't know how many of you are classroom teachers or in the schools and see the different grip patterns out there. It's pretty interesting to see. But also important in motor output is having an open web space, which means, let me see if I can get it right. My web space right here is open. It's the web space between my index finger and my thumb. If you look at that, what creates that is my ability, my ability to oppose my fingers. That's what creates that nice open web space. Without it, they're going to really struggle with their grip and being able to stabilize their hand and arm. So they're just moving this when writing. That's the most efficient way to grasp. You can grasp either with a tripod. Let me see if I can see. Okay, tripod grasp. Some people will add the 4th finger, which you can still have distal movement. Or the other efficient grasp pattern is an adapted grasp, which is where you're putting the pencil between the index and the middle and then moving from there. All of those allow you to have an efficient grasp pattern. I will share the resources for my lecture over the summer at Region 10. It has more than you'll ever want. It's about 4 pages, but I'll share that at the end of the presentation if you're interested in learning more about these skills or perception, etc. And it'll have a little more information for you there. But moving on to difficulty with storage and retrieval of letter forms, that's what we call orthographic processing or the orthographic codes. It's important to remember that when we're talking about spelling, we're talking about orthographic patterns. So it's strings of letters and how they correlate with our orthographic spelling rules. When we're talking just about orthographic processing for dysgraphia, you're really looking at the ability to store and retrieve the letter form. I think what struck me the most, I had a student when I first started evaluating dysgraphia, and he wrote his letter E different in the same writing sample. And so I was just trying to figure it out. I said, can you close your eyes and just look in your mind's eye and tell me what the letter E looks like. And so he sat there for a while, and I was like, well, do you see an E? And he's like, no, it's dark. And that just really struck me, because that's when I realized he could not bring to his mind's eye what an E looked like. He couldn't verbally describe what an E looked like. That's that orthographic processing component when you're talking about letters. So for him, it was drawing an E differently in the same writing sample, because he couldn't bring it from orthographic memory in order to produce it. And that has stuck with me for almost 10 years now. So I'm going to have you experience a graphomotor difficulty. I want you to get a space on your paper. You're going to print your full name, your first, middle, and last name, and you have to use print, no cursive. If you have extra time after doing that, then you can start writing the lowercase alphabet in order. But wait, that doesn't really give you a graphomotor difficulty. But what will is I'm going to change things on you. I want you to stand up to do this activity. So go ahead and stand up. Stand up in front of your desk. You're going to put your dominant index finger. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to put my index finger on the paper where I plan to write. I'm going to use my non-dominant hand to write. And then when I say go, you're going to close your eyes and start the activity. Okay? Everyone standing or half stand. Put your dominant index finger where you're going to start. The writing utensils in your non-dominant hands. Close your eyes and begin. You're writing your first, middle, and last name. And if you have time, go ahead and start writing the lowercase alphabet. Five, four, three, two, one. Okay, so open your eyes and look at your writing. And just kind of think about your thoughts about how it differs from your regular dominant hand writing. And hold those thoughts, because we're going to talk about it in a minute. Next, I'm going to give you an orthographic difficulty. So you can write with your dominant hand. Your graphomotor is intact for this simulation, but you're going to use the code on the next slide, and you're going to keep writing your composition until I say stop. I'm going to give you a minute. It's going to seem like forever. The writing prompt is going to be, what is your favorite thing about fall? So try and get your thoughts out through your hands onto the paper. The only thing is you must use the code. You can't use any letters. You may begin as soon as the code appears. You're using the code. You're not using letters. Writing about your favorite thing about fall. You're using your dominant hand. The only thing I'm changing is the orthographic code. Tell me what you like about fall. Keep writing. Got about 10 seconds. Okay. So think about how that felt for a second. and look at your writing from your graphomotor difficulty. Think about how it was writing when I took away your orthographic code. Oops. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the characteristics and what cause they're linked to. But I'm going to do that by listening to y'all and what your experience was when you were experiencing either the graphomotor or the orthographic deficit. Tell me if you felt anything, if you could feel any of these characteristics as you were writing or in your writing. And y'all can feel free to popcorn out. Anyone share? How about spacing? Did anyone have poor spacing between words when they were doing their graphomotor or even their orthographic, but it's usually a graphomotor perception? I took away your hand dominance, but took away your motor planning. I took away your normal sensory feedback loop using your vision and your non-dominant hand that's not well established for your feedback for writing. Did y'all have poorly formed letters? Did you see that?
A couple comments that we're hearing lots of
Sure.
frustration, not
Okay.
knowing where I was on page, poor spacing, and slow labored writing.
Yes, absolutely. What else did y'all notice? Any of these others?
I felt like I knew what I was writing, but when we were able to open our eyes, where I started off on the line, I was going uphill.
Uphill and downhill.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
That's exactly what we see in student writing samples. Did you notice that it was a bigger size than you usually write?
Oh, yes. And I even in my mind, I thought, I know what these letters look like, but they don't look like what my mind was picturing.
Right. So you had the orthographic code, but your graphomotor difficulty impacted the way your legibility was and your rate of writing. What about, did anyone feel when they were using their non-dominant hand that heavy pressure? Were you trying to hold on to the pencil harder almost? Did you have lighter pressure or harder pressure than your normal writing with either?
Yeah, some said low volume of written output. There were a couple of those. Some said they intentionally didn't write letters normally would because they wanted to stay close to the paper.
Did y'all, for lack of a better term, did you dumb it down or use lower vocabulary than your oral vocabulary? Like using the word big instead of enormous? It's easier to remember that code. It's more familiar. Marlena, I think you're muted. If you want to say something. Anyone else want to share? Y'all are quiet tonight. Okay, so these are the characteristics of causes. And I think you kind of got to experience that through the graphomotor and orthographic difficulty. So this is what we look for in our students' writing. And I linked it to the cause for you. Some are due to both either or both causes, but some are more one or the other. So I'm sorry, this should say dysgraphia intervention. I'll fix that. But the components of dysgraphia intervention are handwriting. This is coming straight from the handbook. It's pages, I think it's 62 through 64, if I remember right. But it talks about what we're supposed to do for dysgraphia intervention. If there are some students that have dysgraphia with handwriting deficits only. So we want to make sure and work with posture, grip, and letter formation. And some students have dysgraphia with handwriting and spelling deficits. And for those students, the handbook asks us to do explicit instruction in phoneme grapheme correspondence, letter order and sequence patterns, orthographic conventions, including syllable types, orthographic rules, irregular words, morphology, and etymology. And what I will tell you is we put those students that have dysgraphia with spelling deficits, we put them in our dyslexia program, but we focus on encoding, which is spelling. And those are the goals that we focus on because it has all of the components required from the handbook. Written expression, some students, if you're looking at a younger student, the expectation is not so great then. So if you're finding them and they're younger, they might not need written expression instruction. But if you have students that are older and it has impacted their written expression, then it is important to go through and give them strategies for that process. The methodology is 4 of the ones that are used for dyslexia intervention. And the methodology for dysgraphia intervention is simultaneous multisensory. So you're using visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. Diagnostic teaching to automaticity, making sure you're systematic and cumulative. So you're building and not missing anything, as well as the explicit instruction. Handwriting is not an independent activity because practice makes permanent. When you're looking at when you're remediating handwriting skills, you want to make sure that you are demonstrating, students are imitating, you're using a consistent strategy for stroke formation, letter placement, etc. The research shows that using numbered arrows for stroke sequence works, as well as working from gross motor or writing the letter very big, moving to small. If you can't write it big, if your formation is not good big, it's not going to be good small because it requires more distal mobility. So you're combining all of those things into the instruction. So accommodations, I have a couple more minutes to show you accommodations. Let's see. So for dyslexia, when we're looking at accommodations, I think my view is coming from probably my neuro background in the hospital. For instance, if I had a patient with a stroke, there were some things we were going to be able to work on to get to the level before their stroke. And then there were other things that we might need to compensate. They might not be completely independent when they leave the hospital. We might give them tools like a shower bench or a walker, etc. But they would need some tools in order to do their daily functions. So thinking of the daily functions of a student, it also needs to be a mix of remediation and compensation. So remediation is the dyslexia intervention. They're working on phonemic awareness, phonics, decoding, which improves fluency and enables them to read text independently. However, we also need to accommodate for the decoding, because the barrier of difficulty with decoding and word reading, it limits or prevents access to grade level text. So we don't want them to lose access to grade level text. We want them to have that access. We use accommodations such as text to speech, extra time on assignments and testing. They may also need support with standard spell check, which looks at orthographic errors, or phonetic spelling assist, which looks at phonological errors, as well as content and language supports for unfamiliar words. Those are all important to provide the student while they're getting dyslexia intervention. So you're working at it from both, I guess, both directions of the pillars of reading. For dysgraphia, our intervention targets letter formation, and if they have spelling deficits, it targets encoding to work on improving their handwriting fluency and our spelling. That's the remediation component, is the intervention, but it's important for them to have compensation through accommodations so they can participate in grade level speech and be able to produce written text, even if it's through speech to text or spell check, or a PDF annotator is something that you can download a PDF and then type into it. If you have Adobe Pro, it's similar to that. As well as word prediction software. Not every student needs it, but sometimes it helps students with having content vocabulary in their writing so that they don't get kind of stopped in the writing process. They're able to move on through it for the creativity and to get their thoughts out. But dysgraphia impacts dictation, which is taking notes. I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute. It can impact copying from the board or copying from near point samples, as well as obviously written expression or written composition. So I'm going to tell you about this first example is from Jackson last year. He's in 7th grade now, but this is when he was in 6th grade. He's a bright kid. He just struggles when he's writing by hand. He's someone that would be the poster child for dysgraphia when you're talking about oral language versus what you're able to put in text via your hand. He could talk your ear off, and sometimes he uses words and I'm like, where did you get that word? Just adultish. I don't know how to explain it. His syntax and everything is just different. So bright kid, but they were doing an argumentative essay in class, and they were doing it in their journal, and that's how they were doing their essay. You can kind of see it through the scratching out. He got frustrated in the process because after he got his ideas out, he had to rewrite the whole thing. And he didn't have his accommodations at that time. So had a conversation as a parent with the teacher and explained dysgraphia and his performance when he's not writing by his hand is so different. So we gave him his accommodations. Now, I mean, he got his thoughts out. This was a process, right? He used text to speech. He got his thoughts out on paper, but then he had several revisions. But it wasn't as big of a deal because he was using speech to text and able to edit and go back without using handwriting. So if you're looking at both samples, same kid, same abilities, just one is having him write by hand and one is with accommodations. So this is the example that I like to share with people as well as teachers, because I know it's not well understood yet. But it's really important to know this and advocate for students with that, because asking a student to write or to limit their written expression and their creativity and their voice to what they can compose by hand, it's not only frustrating, it's punitive. We wouldn't do that with a student that had a broken arm or was born with a different hand and didn't have good hand function. We wouldn't ask a student to do that. So just remember that because a disability is invisible does not mean it doesn't impact the student in multiple ways throughout the day. And it's hard to understand that if you don't have it, because you don't have the same experience. So I really like the graphomotor or orthographic simulation and helping teachers understand what it's like for their students. This is my older son, Sammy. He's in 8th grade now. This is when he's in 7th grade, but let me give you some background. He is the son of an OT. So you know, I was working with him since he was in PK. He had a little bit of an expressive oral language difficulty when he was younger. And he has some other motor issues. He's what the neurologist calls just the clumsy kid syndrome. So he got his motor skills from me, so I can thank him. He can thank me for that. But I did a lot of intervention with him. He went through 3 years of handwriting intervention in the Dysgraphia program. It's just not going to come together for him. I don't know if you can see, but he writes his name different every time he writes it, and he's almost 14. So I think this was good for me to learn as a parent, because sometimes you just might not get there, and you can't be attached to how you get there. It's better to be attached to the end result. What do I want him to be able to do? So this is Rila. My big frustration last year was history, because students took notes, and it was hard to get across that he needs a copy of the notes. The copy after attempt is not an appropriate accommodation for students with dysgraphia. It's not about them trying harder. It's about them being able to write by hand. So they need a copy of lecture notes without attempt. I feel very strongly about that. But in our first unit test, this is what he brought home, and this is what we were studying from. So you can see how we were not able to, because neither he nor I can read his writing, and he didn't remember what he was trying to write. So that copy of notes is essential for learning across the curriculum. This is math, and he does, as far as achievement wise, he does well in math. He just has to line up his problems. He uses just notebook paper turned sideways to line up his numbers and his problems, his calculations. Otherwise, he can get off on spacing and make errors from that, but he can tell you how to solve the problem. He does know how to do that, but that's been his trick, to use that. But those are my kids and their experiences with their dysgraphia. One is very mild. One is more severe, but that is my experience and with teachers. And do y'all have any questions for me tonight? Hopefully I hit the topics you wanted to hear. We have some in the chart of the chat. Oh, let me give y'all that resource real quick. So this is tons of resources, as well as references and different things we've done in my district. It's from a different presentation, not tonight's presentation, but a lot of the same things were in there. So I'm going to share that link. You should be able to view it. You should be able to download it as a PDF or Word doc as well. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, while you guys are thinking of questions, I want to say thank you, Laura. We really appreciate this very detailed, in-depth overview. Appreciate the links. For everybody who's here and who comes to our presentations regularly. Oh, I'm sorry. I realized my video is not on. There we go. I'm going to put a series of things in the chat while you're thinking of questions. So let me give you a preview of what's going to be in the chat, and then we'll stick around longer if Laura has any, if anybody has questions for Laura.
Yeah.
So in the chat, there's going to be a link if you need a continuing education certificate. You can click on that and fill it out. There's a link to a survey to tell us how we did tonight. And then I want to talk to everybody about 2 events coming up. Our next community workshop is on November 6th, and it's going to be on ADHD strategies, a really useful one. Whether you are already very familiar with ADHD strategies or want to add some to your repertoire. And then our big event is this week. It's going to be this Thursday. We have the 11th annual Helen Peel Distinguished Lecture Series, and it's going to be called The Reading Brain, Understanding the Science of Dyslexia. It's with Dr. Jack Fletcher, and you can still register. You can register to come in person, or you can also register to attend by Zoom. And it is a half-day workshop, and it's going to be fantastic if you're interested in coming.
And we did have a few questions come through, Laura. I don't know if you've seen some of those in
Yeah,
there.
I saw, let's see, Roy Payne from Arkansas. If you can email me, I put up my email on the slide right now. If you'll email me, I'm happy to send you the shell. It's what we use for 504. And I know everything is now SPED, so you would need to add your cognitive, but I'm happy to send you the evaluation shell. We use the, for K through 6, we use the PAL 2 by Virginia Berninger for a lot of the components. And then someone asked about simulations. Yes, please use the simulations. Feel free to use those. I didn't come up with the orthographic code, so I need to go find the reference for that, but you're welcome to use them with your teachers or parents or whomever. I think the more that we can show people what it's like to have the disability, the better the understanding will be for them. In addition, there's a really good, if you're looking for a dyslexia simulation experience, the Northern California branch of the IDA sells dyslexia experience kits, and it includes 6 stations, and we bought those this year and we did them, and we have our campuses checking them out for literacy night. It's really eye-opening. There's also a more simple one that you can do for dyslexia. You can get a regular size drinking straw and then like the milkshake straws, and get some pretty complicated text from National Institutes of Health. If you use medical jargon and something pretty complicated, print those out and ask your participants to read through the straw. They can't read like this. They've got to read right close up. It makes them decode the word or look at the word letter by letter by letter, and then have to go back and reread. So it simulates the decoding barrier in dyslexia. That's a great one to use as well.
And somebody asked about resources for left-handed writers.
Yes, there are. If you'll, I would Google, I guess it's called Learning Without Tears, left-handers. They have great information. Basically, we before we knew better, we forced our lefties to live in a right-handed world, and we had their paper turned 90 degrees opposite of what it should be. When a lefty crosses their hand over their body, their paper should be tilted this way. It's hard to explain. Let me do it, I guess. Let's see if y'all can see. Can you see? Okay. Okay, so I'm right-handed. So I turn my paper this way. So when I cross midline, I don't have to do anything with my hand. Same for a lefty, it should go this way. So when they cross their paper, they can still have the appropriate wrist function and write appropriately. If I made a left-hander do it on a right tilt, then I would have to have them hook. That's why a lot of left-handers use that hooked wrist. Another good strategy for left-handers with spiral notebooks is to flip the notebook the other way. So they're writing kind of from back to front on their pages, but they're not hitting the spiral each time. But those are a few offhand, but Learning Without Tears, left-handers, look up that. They have some good stuff.
Laura, is it Learning Without Tears or Handwriting Without Tears?
It was Handwriting Without Tears. I think they've changed their name to
Okay.
Learning Without Tears,
Great.
but if you look up either, it should come up.
That's wonderful. I didn't know they changed their name, but I used that program a long time ago and it was really great.
Yeah, I loved it as an OT because they group letters by motor patterns, and what we use in our program in Humble is we focus on the 13 most frequent letters in written text of the lowercase alphabet, because that's what kids are writing the most. We focus on, if you know Handwriting Without Tears, we do the Diber letters as well as the magic C and E, and those are the 13 most frequent letters used in general, and we see some good effect. You kind of have that self-regulation effect as they start to notice what they're doing, what they're writing, that can help improve also.
And Laura, you've received an overwhelming amount of positive feedback, obviously providing
Oh,
information
good.
for a significant area of need for all of us. And several have asked about, sharing these resources with other teachers in their campus. And so I want to remind participants we do post the workshop recording back to our website, the Center for Learning Disabilities website. And underneath the recording, there'll be a clickable PDF of the handouts that have also been reposted into the chat box right now that Laura was so generous to share with us.
And yep, let me share that other piece too. Let's see if I can reshare the link to the resources from this summer. Any other questions while I'm doing that?
We do have a comment that the survey is not opening.
Okay, I will check.
Okay, here's the link. There we go.
Thank you.
Sure. But you're welcome to share. My goal is to have kids get what they need and have these disabilities better understood in the mainstream classroom. Secondary especially, I think we talk a lot about it at elementary. It's harder to get all of the teachers. There's so many teachers in secondary, so we work on that. But the more we can help kids, parents, and teachers understand, the better our students will do.
Yeah.
Same
Well,
with
thank you.
ADHD.
Yes, yes,
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, the
definitely.
work samples you shared from your own children was very eye-opening. Yeah.
Mhm.
And
It
good
is. I
example, like
think,
you said, good examples of secondary students.
yeah, we don't think about all the writing that they have to do. So, okay. Well, thank y'all so much. I appreciate it. I did put up my email. You're welcome to email me. It does take me a little bit to get back on this email. But I will get back to you.